I'm Dr. Elliott Harmon, board-certified neurologist and epileptologist at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York City, or at least I was until I tendered my resignation 6 weeks ago after 17 years of practice. My credentials include fellowships at Johns Hopkins and Mass General, over 200 published papers, and a reputation as one of the foremost experts in refractory epilepsy on the East Coast. I've diagnosed thousands of patients, performed countless EEGs, interpreted more brain scans than I can count, and stood beside families during their darkest moments when seizures robbed them of normalcy. I've seen everything you'd expect in neurology. I've watched patients seize for 40 minutes straight despite maximal benzodiazepine doses. I've diagnosed rare autoimmune encephalitides that mimic psychiatric breaks. I've told a 23-year-old woman she had glioblastoma. I've seen status epilepticus so severe it caused permanent brain damage. I've witnessed the devastating progression of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. I thought I understood the limits of what the human brain could do, both in health and in catastrophic failure. But what I'm about to tell you is the one case that shattered every scientific principle I'd built my career upon, made me question whether I understood anything at all about consciousness and neural function, and ultimately drove me to walk away from the only profession I'd ever loved. This isn't about a misdiagnosis or medical error. This is about something that shouldn't be possible according to every textbook, every research paper, every fundamental law of neuroscience I'd ever studied. The Epilepsy Monitoring Unit at Columbia Presbyterian is state-of-the-art. 24 private rooms, each equipped with continuous video EEG monitoring, infrared cameras for nighttime observation, and direct nursing stations with real-time waveform displays. We use 256-channel high-density EEG arrays for surgical candidates, magnetoencephalography for source localization, and have immediate access to 3 Tesla MRI with advanced diffusion tensor imaging capabilities. The EMU is my domain. I've run it for 9 years, training residents and fellows, determining surgical candidacy for patients whose seizures destroy their lives when medication can't control them. Our success rate for surgical outcomes is among the highest in the country. 73% of our patients achieve complete seizure freedom after temporal lobectomy. October 14th, 2024, started like any Tuesday morning. I arrived at 6:47 a.m., grabbed terrible hospital coffee from the physician's lounge on the 3rd floor, and began reviewing overnight data from our 7 admitted patients. The monitoring technicians had flagged 2 nocturnal events for my review. Both typical temporal lobe seizures originating from the right meshal structures, nothing remarkable. Standard rhythmic theta activity progressing to spike wave discharges, then post-ictal suppression. Textbook cases. I was finishing my notes when my pager went off at 7:23 a.m. New admission arriving from the ED within the hour. High priority. The patient's name was Evelyn Chen, a 31-year-old graduate student in theoretical physics at Columbia. Her referring neurologist, Dr. Patricia Hoffman from Mount Sinai, had sent a detailed summary that arrived in our system at 6:15 a.m. Evelyn had developed seizures 8 months prior, initially infrequent, perhaps once monthly, but now occurring 3 to 4 times weekly despite trials of levetiracetam up to 3,000 milligrams daily, lamotrigine titrated to 400 milligrams, and lacosamide at 400 milligrams, all at therapeutic serum levels confirmed by blood work. Her seizures followed an unusual pattern. She would stop mid-conversation, stare blankly for 15 to 30 seconds, occasionally make subtle lip-smacking movements, or pick at her clothing, then resume talking as if nothing had happened. Classic absence seizures, except absence seizures don't typically begin in adults, and usually respond well to medication, particularly ethosuximide or valproic acid. Her outside MRI from Mount Sinai, performed on a 1.5 Tesla scanner, showed no structural abnormalities, no hippocampal sclerosis, no cortical dysplasia, no tumors or vascular malformations. Her routine EEGs had been inconclusive. One report from August mentioned suspicious sharp waves in the right temporal region, possibly artifact, but nothing definitive. Another report from September showed occasional left temporal slowing during drowsiness, but no clear epileptiform discharges. Dr. Hoffman wanted prolonged monitoring to capture events, characterize them electrographically, and determine if Evelyn might be a surgical candidate if a focal seizure onset zone could be identified. I met Evelyn in room 12 at 8:15 a.m. She was thin, almost frail, with long black hair pulled into a ponytail, wearing Columbia sweatpants and a gray hoodie, looking exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes suggested weeks of poor sleep. Her fiancé, Robert, sat beside her bed, holding her hand. He looked equally exhausted. I introduced myself and my team, Dr. Nina Okafor, my second-year epilepsy fellow from Stanford, and Jake Delgado, our senior EEG technologist, who'd been with the unit for 12 years and had personally performed over 15,000 electrode placements. "I just want them to stop," Evelyn said quietly. Her voice had a peculiar flat quality, emotionally blunted, which can be a side effect of anti-epileptic drugs, but felt different somehow. "I can't finish my dissertation. I can't drive. I'm losing whole pieces of my day, and I don't even remember them." My advisor's losing patience. I was supposed to defend in December. I explained the monitoring process in detail. We'd reduce her medications systematically to increase seizure likelihood while keeping her safe. Maintain continuous video EEG surveillance 24 hours a day with nurses checking on her every 30 minutes. And hopefully capture multiple events to map her seizure focus precisely using advanced source localization algorithms. If we identified a discrete focus amenable to resection, she might be a surgical candidate. Jake began applying the electrodes, 23 scalp locations following the International 10 to 20 system, plus 2 sphenoidal electrodes threaded through the cheek for better temporal lobe coverage, since temporal lobe epilepsy was our primary suspected diagnosis. The process took 45 minutes. Evelyn tolerated it well, though she seemed distant, distracted, occasionally staring at the wall for seconds at a time before refocusing. "Are you sleeping okay?" I asked while reviewing her medication list on my tablet. "Not really," she admitted. "Maybe 3 or 4 hours a night. I keep having the same dream. I'm standing in a room full of mirrors, but my reflection is doing things I'm not doing, moving differently, looking at me. Sometimes she mouths words I can't hear." I noted it in her chart. Vivid dreams and nightmares can be prodromal features of temporal lobe epilepsy, sometimes occurring hours before seizures. They can also indicate mesial temporal involvement. Robert squeezed her hand and told her it would be okay, that we'd figure this out. We started continuous monitoring at 10:07 a.m. Baseline EEG showed normal posterior dominant rhythm of 9.5 Hz, symmetric and reactive to eye opening. Normal sleep spindles and vertex waves during drowsiness. No epileptiform discharges during the first hour. No focal slowing, no background asymmetries. Everything looked completely normal. I reduced her lacosamide dose from 400 milligrams to 200 milligrams and discontinued the lamotrigine entirely, keeping her on reduced levetiracetam for safety. Now we waited. The first seizure occurred at 2:34 p.m., while Evelyn was reading a physics textbook in bed. I was in my office 3 doors down reviewing surgical cases when Nina called me, her voice urgent but controlled. "Dr. Harmon, we've got an event in room 12. You need to see this right now." I reached the monitoring station in 30 seconds. On the video feed, Evelyn had stopped reading and was staring straight ahead, motionless. Classic behavioral arrest. The book remained open in her lap. Her posture was rigid. I looked at the EEG display, expecting to see rhythmic theta or spike wave activity. The waveforms were completely normal. No spike wave discharges, no rhythmic slowing, no attenuation, no post-ictal suppression, no electrographic correlate whatsoever. Just normal 9.5 Hz posterior dominant rhythm, completely unchanged from baseline. "That's just artifact," I said, checking the impedance values. All electrodes showed good contact, under 5 kiloohms. "She's awake and alert, just pausing to think. We need actual seizure activity to diagnose anything." "Keep watching," Nina said, pointing at the screen with visible unease. Evelyn's right hand slowly lifted off the book. Her fingers began moving in strange, deliberate patterns. Not the purposeless automatisms typical of temporal lobe seizures, like picking or fumbling, but precise geometric shapes traced in the air. Triangles, circles, pentagons, complex symbols I didn't recognize, angular and deliberate. Her eyes remained fixed straight ahead, unblinking. Pupils dilated but reactive when Jake entered the room and shined a pen light to check. 45 seconds elapsed. Then she blinked once, looked down at her book, and continued reading exactly where she'd left off, her finger marking the same line. "Did you see any epileptiform discharges during that?" I asked Jake, who was already reviewing the raw data at maximum sensitivity, scrolling through every channel. "Nothing," he said, his frown deepening. "Completely normal background rhythm throughout. No change whatsoever. I've checked for subtle changes, looked at every electrode. It's like nothing happened neurologically, but we both watched her stop and move her hand. That made no sense. You cannot have a seizure without abnormal electrical activity. That's the fundamental definition of a seizure. Abnormal, excessive, synchronous neuronal discharge, creating measurable changes in brain electrical activity. No electricity, no seizure. Basic neuroscience. First principle of epileptology. Maybe the electrodes aren't placed correctly, I suggested, though I knew Jake's work was impeccable. Deep focus we're not capturing? Orbital frontal? Deep meshal structures? "We have sphenoidals in," Jake reminded me, pointing to channels 17 and 18 on the display. "They're picking up clear temporal activity bilaterally. If she's seizing anywhere in the temporal lobes, meshal structures, hippocampus, amygdala, we'd see it. We're getting good signal from everywhere." I went to Evelyn's room immediately. She was reading peacefully, no distress, no confusion. No post-ictal features whatsoever. Patients are typically confused, disoriented, sometimes combative after temporal lobe seizures. "Evelyn, do you remember what just happened a few minutes ago?" She looked up, genuinely confused. "I've been reading." "Why? Did something happen?" "You stopped for about a minute. You don't remember that at all?" Her expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Not confusion exactly. Something else. Recognition, maybe. "No, I don't remember stopping. Did I have a seizure?" "Your hand was moving, making shapes in the air, geometric patterns." She looked at her right hand as if it belonged to someone else, turning it over slowly, examining her fingers. "That happens sometimes. Robert tells me I do things I don't remember. Sometimes I find notes I don't remember writing." Robert nodded emphatically from his chair. "It's been getting worse over the last month. Last week she walked to the kitchen, made tea, brought it back, drank half of it, and had no memory of doing any of it. But she was completely responsive the whole time. I asked her questions and she answered them normally. It's like she's there, but she's not. This was wrong, profoundly wrong. Behavioral automatisms during temporal lobe seizures don't involve normal responsiveness. Patients are altered, confused, not themselves. They don't carry on coherent conversations and perform complex sequential tasks normally. They might follow simple commands, but they're clearly impaired. This sounded like she was functioning completely normally during episodes she couldn't remember. We captured 4 more events over the next 36 hours. Each time the EEG remained completely, impossibly normal. Every channel, every electrode, perfect waking background rhythm. Each time Evelyn exhibited different behaviors during the episodes. Once she stood up, walked in a perfect circle around her bed exactly 7 times clockwise, then sat back down and resumed watching television with no awareness she'd moved. Once she spoke for 20 seconds in what sounded like backward speech, phonemes reversed but rhythmic, almost musical. Once she simply stared at the wall and cried silently, tears streaming down her face, her expression anguished, before snapping back to normal with no memory of crying, and impossibly no tears on her cheeks when I examined her 30 seconds later. That last detail froze something inside me. I'd watched her cry on video. Jake had watched it. Nina had watched it. The tears had been clearly visible on the monitor, streaming down both cheeks. But when we entered the room 30 seconds after she recovered, her face was completely dry. No tear tracks, no redness around her eyes, nothing. "That's not possible," Nina whispered beside me in the hallway. "We just saw... the tears were there, on the video. How is her face dry?" "I know what we saw," I cut her off, my voice harsher than intended. "I don't have an explanation." I ordered an urgent 3 Tesla MRI with comprehensive epilepsy protocol. Thin cuts through the hippocampi at 1 millimeter intervals. FLAIR sequences, diffusion-weighted imaging, susceptibility-weighted imaging to look for microhemorrhages, arterial spin labeling, everything. The scan took 90 minutes. The results showed nothing. Absolutely normal brain architecture. No hippocampal sclerosis, no cortical malformations, no tumors, no abnormal vasculature, perfect gray-white differentiation. The radiologist, Dr. Kumar, called me personally to say it was one of the most unremarkable brain scans he'd ever read. I consulted our MEG team, explaining we had a patient with behavioral seizures but no EEG correlate. They agreed to map her brain activity, though they were skeptical. MEG is more sensitive than EEG for detecting deep sources. If there was abnormal activity anywhere, MEG would find it. They mapped her during an event the next day, October 17th at 3:42 p.m. She stared blankly for 30 seconds while lying in the MEG scanner. The results came back hours later. Normal. No focal abnormalities, no hypersynchrony, no epileptiform patterns whatsoever. The neurophysiologist, Dr. Raymond Patel, told me he'd never seen such normal data during a clinically obvious event. On October 17th at 11:43 p.m., I was reviewing her entire case alone in my office, going through every page of documentation, every EEG epoch, searching for something I'd missed. My door was open. The hallways were quiet. Then my cell phone rang. Night shift nurse Tanya Rodriguez panicked in a way I'd never heard from her in 5 years. "Dr. Harmon, you need to come to the EMU immediately. Room 12. Something's very wrong with the Chen patient." I ran, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. When I reached the monitoring station, both night nurses were standing outside Evelyn's room, visibly shaken, their faces pale. Through the window, I could see Evelyn standing in the middle of her room, perfectly still, arms at her sides. Robert was asleep in the recliner beside her bed, snoring softly. On every EEG monitor, all 25 channels, her brainwaves were flat, not flatline. Not the electrical silence of brain death or electrode disconnection. Something else entirely. The channels showed perfect, smooth horizontal lines at 0 microvolts, but the impedance indicators showed all electrodes were properly connected with good contact, under 5 kiloohms. The amplifiers were functioning. The signal was there. It just showed absolutely no activity whatsoever, positive or negative, as if her brain had paused. As if the 86 billion neurons had simultaneously stopped firing. "How long has she been like this?" I asked, my voice tight. 4 minutes, Tanya said, checking her watch. "We were about to call a code. We thought the equipment was malfunctioning, but we checked. Everything's working." I entered the room slowly, my heart pounding. Evelyn stood motionless, arms at her sides, eyes open but unfocused, staring at nothing. I called her name. No response. I clapped loudly near her ear. Nothing. I checked her pulse. 72 beats per minute, regular. Respirations, 14 per minute, unlabored. Pupils equal 4 millimeters, reactive to light. She was physiologically fine except for the minor detail that her brain appeared to have no electrical activity whatsoever, which would mean she was clinically brain dead. Except she was standing upright with normal posture, maintaining her balance and breathing normally without support. I stood in front of her, inches from her face, and called her name again. "Evelyn, can you hear me?" Her eyes moved, locked onto mine with sudden, complete focus, and she smiled. Not a seizure automatism, not an involuntary muscle contraction, a deliberate, knowing, conscious smile that conveyed understanding and something else. Amusement, maybe. "Dr. Harmon," she said in a voice that sounded wrong, too resonant, reverberating, like it was coming from somewhere larger than her throat, like it was echoing from inside a cathedral. "You're looking for electricity, but consciousness doesn't need electricity. Consciousness is borrowed. We don't generate it, we receive it. You've been measuring the radio, not the signal." Then her EEG snapped back to normal. 9.5 hertz posterior dominant rhythm appearing simultaneously across all channels, and she collapsed forward. I caught her, lowered her to the floor carefully, supporting her head, checking her vitals. Everything normal, pulse strong, breathing regular. After 10 seconds, she opened her eyes, confused and disoriented, looking around the room without recognition. What happened? Why am I on the floor? Where's Robert? I couldn't answer. My hands were shaking visibly. My mouth was dry. In 17 years of neurology, I'd never seen anything remotely like what had just occurred. We ran every test I could think of, every exotic possibility. Lumbar puncture, opening pressure normal, clear colorless fluid, glucose normal, protein normal, cell count normal. Autoimmune encephalitis panel testing for antibodies against NMD, A receptors, LGI1, CASPR2, AMPA receptors, GABAB receptors, all negative. Paraneoplastic antibodies, negative. Comprehensive metabolic panel, normal. Toxicology screen, negative. Ammonia level, normal. Heavy metal screening, negative. Genetic testing for known epilepsy mutations, negative. I was grasping, ordering tests I knew wouldn't explain what I'd witnessed. Continuous monitoring showed 15 more events over the next 3 days, each with completely normal EEG, each with increasingly bizarre behaviors that seemed purposeful rather than automatic. During one episode, she wrote 17 pages of mathematical equations in a notebook, writing rapidly without pause, equations I couldn't begin to understand. Her PhD advisor, Dr. Leonard Strauss, came to visit, and I showed him the pages. His face went pale. He told me the equations solved a problem Evelyn had been stuck on for 8 months. Problem involving quantum field theory and topological defects that was central to her dissertation. The solutions were correct, elegant, sophisticated, except Evelyn had no memory of writing them and, when shown the pages later, couldn't explain the mathematics she'd written. During another episode on October 20th, she spoke in what sounded like Latin for 90 seconds. I recorded it and sent the audio to a colleague in classics. He identified it as medieval Latin, ecclesiastical, portions of texts about the nature of the soul and multiplicity of consciousness within single bodies. Evelyn had never studied Latin. On October 21st, Dr. Okafor found me in my office at 2 a.m. I'd been reviewing Evelyn's entire record again, every page of documentation, searching for something, anything that made medical sense. Nina looked exhausted and frightened. "We have 2 more, she said quietly, closing the door behind her. 2 more what? 2 more patients, one admitted tonight to the regular neurology floor, a 38-year-old man named Harrison Webb with new-onset seizures. His EEG is normal during witnessed events. And there's a 14-year-old girl named Stephanie Lynn in the pediatric EMU. Same presentation. Normal EEG during witnessed seizures. Dr. Phillips called me an hour ago. He's completely lost. He thinks his equipment is broken, but the engineers checked everything." My chest tightened. Cold sweat formed on my back. That's not possible. 3 patients simultaneously with the same impossible presentation? There's something else. Nina pulled up an email on her phone, her hands trembling slightly. "Dr. Hoffman, Evelyn's referring neurologist?" I contacted her yesterday to ask if she'd seen anything like this before. She responded an hour ago. She's had 4 other patients in the last year with similar presentations. Normal EEGs during witnessed seizures, behaviors they don't remember, sometimes saying things that don't make sense. She's been documenting them carefully but hasn't published because she can't explain the findings and doesn't want to destroy her credibility. She's terrified of being labeled incompetent. I felt something crack inside my professional foundation, like weight-bearing walls collapsing. This wasn't an anomaly. This wasn't a one-time impossibility. This was a pattern. Multiple patients, multiple hospitals. How many other neurologists were seeing this and staying silent? Over the next week, I identified 2 more cases in our own hospital system from the previous 6 months by searching medical records for patients with witnessed seizures, but normal EEGs. Both had been discharged with diagnoses of pseudo-seizures or non-epileptic events, psychiatric diagnoses we use when seizures don't have electrical correlates. I read their charts carefully. The descriptions matched. We'd been dismissing them, calling them functional, when maybe we were seeing something else entirely. I discharged Evelyn on October 23rd because there was nothing more I could do. Every test was normal. Every scan was normal. Every blood marker was normal. By every objective measure, she was neurologically intact, except for the minor problem that she was having seizures with no seizure activity and doing impossible things while her brain showed no electrical function whatsoever. "What do I do?" she asked me before leaving, her voice small, defeated. "I don't know," I admitted. It was the first time in my career I'd said those words to a patient and meant them completely. "The dreams are worse now," she said quietly, glancing at Robert, who was packing her belongings. "The mirrors. My reflection keeps telling me I need to let her out, that she's been waiting a long time to use my body properly, that we made an agreement before I was born and I'm not holding up my end." I had nothing to say to that. Nothing in my training, nothing in my 17 years of practice prepared me for that statement. Over the next month, I documented 7 more cases personally, all similar, all impossible, all with normal testing and abnormal reality. I stopped sleeping properly, lying awake running through cases. I started doubting other diagnoses, second-guessing interpretations I'd made confidently for years. If these patients were having seizures without electrical activity, what did that mean about consciousness, about the nature of neural function, about everything I'd been taught? Were we just measuring correlates, not causes? Was the brain a generator or a receiver? I found myself researching things I'd never considered before, diving into fringe areas I'd always dismissed. Quantum theories of consciousness proposing that awareness emerges from quantum processes in microtubules. Reports of people functioning normally with massive brain injuries that should have left them vegetative. Cases of hydrocephalus where CT scans showed almost no cortex but normal intelligence. Cases of patients regaining consciousness after being declared brain dead by EEG criteria. The medical literature was filled with footnotes and anomalies we all ignored because they didn't fit our models, didn't fit the paradigm we'd built our entire field upon. On November 29th, I walked into the department chair's office and submitted my resignation letter, effective January 1st, 2025. Dr. Gerald Kaufman looked shocked. He asked why. I told him I'd lost confidence in my ability to practice neurology ethically. He thought I was burned out, dealing with compassion fatigue. He offered me a 3-month sabbatical, reduced clinical hours, more research time. I declined everything. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I'd realized we don't actually understand consciousness at all, that everything we think we know might be completely wrong, that we're measuring shadows and calling them reality. I saw Evelyn one last time in late December. She'd reached out through the hospital patient portal, wanting to thank me for trying to help even though I couldn't. We met at a coffee shop near campus, neutral territory. She looked healthier, more present, more solid somehow. "They stopped," she said simply, "the seizures, about 2 weeks after I left the hospital." "That's wonderful," I said, and meant it sincerely. "But I remember now," she continued, her voice dropping low. "I remember what happens during them. I'm still there, Dr. Harmon. I'm conscious and aware the whole time. But I'm not alone. There's someone else there with me, inside my head, experiencing through my senses." She says she's always been there, since before I was born, since conception. She says everyone has someone else with them, but most people never notice because the other consciousness stays quiet, observes, doesn't interfere. Mine wanted to be noticed, wanted to act, wanted to use the body we share. I sipped my coffee, giving myself time to formulate a response that wouldn't sound dismissive. "Does that frighten you?" "Not anymore." "At first, yes. But she's not malicious. She's just there, like a roommate. We're negotiating boundaries now. She shows me things. The physics equations, those were her. She understands mathematics I can't begin to comprehend. She says she's been trying to teach me for years through dreams, but I wasn't listening." I thought about all my other patients over 17 years, the thousands of brains I'd monitored and mapped and interpreted. Had I been missing something fundamental every single time? How many of those electrical patterns represented multiple consciousnesses, not one? How many anomalies had I dismissed as artifact or noise when they were actually signals of something we don't understand? Does that sound crazy? Evelyn asked, watching my reaction carefully. I don't know what's crazy anymore, I admitted. On January 3rd, 2025, my resignation became official. I cleaned out my office, donated my textbooks to the resident library, and walked out of Columbia Presbyterian for the last time. Dr. Okafor texts me occasionally. She says the cases keep coming, increasing in frequency. She says more neurologists are quietly documenting similar impossibilities across the country, but everyone's terrified of professional suicide. Nobody wants to publish first. Sometimes late at night, I wonder about my own consciousness. I wonder if there's someone else in here with me, staying quiet. I wonder if that voice we call intuition is something more literal than we've imagined. I don't have answers. I left neurology because I realized the fundamental assumptions underlying everything we do might be completely wrong. But I watched it happen, I documented it, and I can't unsee it. I think about Evelyn's reflection, trying to get out. I think about consciousness being borrowed, not generated. Late one night, alone in my apartment, I looked in the bathroom mirror, and my reflection blinked when I didn't. I haven't looked in a mirror since.